She was struggling to keep the lights on, but she spent her last $20 to buy gas for a Hell's Angel. The next afternoon, she looked out her window to see dozens of Harleys lining her street, and they weren't bringing trouble, they were bringing a miracle. The humidity of the Central Valley had settled into a thick, suffocating blanket that morning, turning the old, exposed asphalt of the 76 station into a shimmering convection oven. Vanessa Moe felt the heat radiating up through the worn soles of her sneakers. It was the kind of heat that didn't just make you sweat, it made your bones ache and convinced you that every one of your problems was heavier than it had been the day before. She stood next to pump number 4, the air around the nozzle thick with the metallic, stale scent of evaporated gasoline. Her green cotton top, freshly washed but already clinging to her shoulders, betrayed the dull, persistent ache behind her temples, a souvenir from another night spent juggling spreadsheets and nursing anxiety. The relentless summer was just another adversary in her private war against poverty. The last thing Vanessa needed was trouble. Rent was overdue by 12 days. Her second job waiting tables at the Blue Plate Diner was barely a holding action against the rising tide of bills, and her mother's new set of cardiac medications had swallowed her savings whole, leaving only a hollow where hope used to reside. She carefully unfolded the $20 bill she had crumpled into the corner of her pocket, her entire working capital for the next 3 days. It represented the precise fraction of gas she needed to make it to the diner, back home, and to the pharmacy refill appointment. A half tank, maybe a little more, and a silent promise to drive as if the pedal were made of glass. Just as her hand reached for the slot to prepay, the silence was ripped apart by a harsh, guttural voice from pump 2. "Look, man, I told you, I left my wallet at the shop. My tank's bone dry, miles from home. Just put a gallon in. I'll come back." Vanessa's hand froze. She glanced over. The man speaking was a behemoth, a wall of sun-scorched leather and muscle. His arms, thick as oak trunks, were canvases of fading ink that crawled past the frayed edges of his black cut. The patch on the back of the vest, a blazing, stark red and white, identified him instantly. Hell's Angels, the kind of person the world was designed to fear and avoid. His hair, tied in a loose, heavy ponytail, was lifted momentarily by a ghost of a breeze, revealing a profile carved from granite. A heavy scowl of frustration and something deeper, more volatile, had pulled his features into a knot. The gas station attendant, a young man with a meticulous side part named Ryan, had the look of a college freshman saving for textbooks. He wasn't arguing. He was reciting policy, his voice high and nervous. "No pay, no pump, sir. Company rules." "Sorry," Ryan repeated sharply, his gaze fixed somewhere over the biker's shoulder. The biker's jaw worked, the muscle ticking visibly beneath his tattoo-laden skin. He looked ready to break the pump in half, to tear the plastic signs off the roof, to simply combust from the impotent rage of being stopped by $20 and a policy-bound kid. Vanessa should have ducked her head, slid her 20 into the machine, and focused on her own survival. That biker was a volcano waiting to erupt, and she had no shield. No one would have blamed her for walking away. The very label he wore was a warning sign. But as the biker pivoted slightly, his eyes, a startling, sharp blue, snapped toward the ground in an act of involuntary submission. In that brief, unguarded moment, Vanessa saw past the leather and the intimidation. It wasn't just rage. It was the white-hot humiliation of a powerful man brought low by trivial circumstances. It was the embarrassment of needing help and having to beg for it. It was the look of someone backed into a corner, completely exposed. That look, that naked vulnerability, unlocked something deep inside Vanessa. a memory of her father, a man who had never owned much, standing outside a broken-down car in the rain, hands open, waiting for a stranger to stop. Look for the person, not the label, Ness. She took a breath so shallow it felt inadequate, swallowed the tightness in her throat, and took 3 purposeful steps toward the counter. "I can cover it," she told Ryan, her voice steadier than she felt. Both men turned, the biker's head snapping up in disbelief, Ryan's brow furrowing with confusion and alarm. "Ma'am, you don't need to get involved," Ryan whispered, glancing nervously at the figure at pump 2. Vanessa ignored him, her focus fixed on the biker. He was utterly baffled, his large, imposing body suddenly slack with confusion. "Lady, you don't even know me," he gruffed, the sound deep in his chest. Vanessa offered a small, tired smile that felt genuine despite her worry. "You look like you need a break, Mark," she said, reading the patch on his vest. She pushed her single $20 bill across the counter, put the full 20 in his tank, and just give me $5 back in change. I can make $5 work. Ryan hesitated, his fear wrestling with the instruction. The cash was good. He sighed, took the bill, and awkwardly set the pump at Station 2 to a $20 limit. As the fuel began to flow, the biker, the man named Mark, exhaled a slow, shuddering breath, a sound that conveyed the absolute relief of a crisis averted. He watched the digital display tick upward, and when the tank clicked full, he slowly moved toward Vanessa. He still towered over her, but the aggressive posture was gone, replaced by a strange, bewildered solemnity. "Name's Mark," he said again, this time to her, the gruffness muted. "Vanessa," she replied. He searched her face, not for approval or reward, but for the catch, the punchline, the subtle demand for payment later. He found none. Just a woman, clearly struggling, judging by her worn sneakers and the shadows under her eyes, who had chosen to spend her last $20 on a complete, intimidating stranger. He nodded, a single, deep dip of his heavy head. "You're a rare one, Vanessa," he rasped, his eyes holding hers for a moment too long. Then, without another word, he mounted his huge, matte black Harley-Davidson. He kicked the engine alive with a deafening, thunderous roar that vibrated the asphalt. He gave a final, searching look over his shoulder, a look Vanessa realized she would not soon forget, and rode off, the roar fading into a distant rumble toward the highway. Vanessa collected her $5 in change, pumped her half-tank, and drove away, her hands shaking slightly on the wheel. That $20 was a significant loss, a hole she now had to fill with more hours and less sleep, but her heart, for the first time in months, felt strangely light. The relief she had seen on Mark's face was a currency of its own. The next day dawned predictably hot and relentless. Vanessa attacked her life with renewed, desperate energy. She worked the morning shift at the Blue Plate Diner, her smile stretched thin as she balanced trays of coffee and pancakes. She came home, changed her mother's bandages with practiced, gentle care, and then sat down to plan the rest of her week, trying to make her remaining $5 stretch like elastic. As the afternoon bled into dusk, Vanessa was in the kitchen, prepping dinner, rice and a can of black beans, bulked out with a handful of frozen peas. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of her knife against the cutting board was the only sound in the oppressive stillness. Then, the floorboards began to tremble. It wasn't a local vibration, it was a deep, pervasive, mechanical rumble, a sound like distant thunder trapped beneath the earth, growing exponentially closer. Rumble, rumble. Vanessa's pulse spiked, and her hand instinctively tightened around the knife handle. It was not the sound of a passing bus. It was the sound of dozens of heavy, synchronized engines, the sound of power. She stepped to the window, pushing aside the worn lace curtain. Her breath hitched, catching painfully in her throat. The street was full, completely full. Dozens of motorcycles lined both curbs of her quiet residential block. Big, heavy, immaculate Harleys, their chrome catching the fading light. Engines idled, creating a massive, throbbing wave of sound that shook the glass panes. And on the bikes, or standing beside them, were the riders. Men and women in black leather vests, their faces shadowed by helmets or bandanas. The red and white Hell's Angels patches blazed across their backs like a formation of flags. The atmosphere was one of silent, absolute attention, every single gaze fixed on her